In the beginning, our God created the world. A beautiful world, a world of excess and tranquility. And when our God grew lonely, he populated his world with creatures, all of which he made in his own image, similar so none would feel disadvantaged in this world of endless grassy plains, timid rivers, and countless fruit-bearing trees. All creatures lived in relative peace and harmony. For you see, while only we, the animals, were blessed with the gift of sentience, all others were at least given a basic understanding of how a living creature should act and behave while under the watchful, caring gaze of a generous and kind God. There was no need for strife or fear, for no one lacked anything. Even if one could not find the strength of will to get up and pluck some fruit, one could just wait, sleep, and expect themselves to wake up healthy and refreshed. Our God, in his infinite wisdom and thoughtfulness, had seen fit to imbue the air we breathe with plenty of nutrients, and designed our primary star in such a way that, no matter what, life would always be sustained. Of course, as you know, over time we grew bored. We began to thinker and ponder. We looked at the heavens and wondered what else was out there. We invented the wheel, scripture, computers, and so much more, until eventually we found ourselves floating above our own meager beginnings, our cradle world. After millions of years of technological advancement, we'd finally done it. We'd left our God's embrace, that beautiful green and blue ball he'd made for us. We had grown up as a species, ready to venture out and look for others who wished to ponder and explore the cosmos with us. We set out to discover faraway systems. We landed on strange yet similar worlds, no doubt made by gods who were just as amicable as our own. And just when we were starting to think we were all alone, we found them. Aliens. Creatures who were so similar, and yet, at the same time so very different. Over time, wherever we looked, we'd find more and more, all born on paradise worlds specifically tailored to their inhabitants' needs, undoubtedly made by responsible gods just like our own. As our gods had intended for us, we began to cooperate. We constructed ginormous structures, explored and learned together, and continued to grow as if we were all one big family. The Great Galactic Alliance, we called ourselves. And for a time, all went well. It seemed that beyond the odd black hole or ugly gas giant reality in and of itself was generally a warm and kind place where all sentient creatures could come together as one and enjoy life. That is, of course, until we found it. Ever since ancient times, our most esteemed philosophers, scientists, and clergymen theorized about there being a world opposite to all others. One where creatures lived who'd indulge in every possible taboo, where life cannibalized itself, and would do anything to ensure its own continued existence. A world of chaos, filled with the coldest colds and the hottest hots. A world of unstable climates, shifting topologies and horrific disasters, where one's entire way life could change at the drop of a hat. Where nothing was guaranteed, and that which wished to survive had to continuously adapt and overcome. A world where only the strong survived, and are forced to transform in accordance to the laws of this infernal place. I wouldn't even dare imagine what sorts of horrifying monsters would call such a place home. They'd undoubtedly be warped and twisted beyond mortal comprehension. Their very existence would breed terror and madness in the minds of the particularly innocent and weak-willed. Most of us assumed, or perhaps hoped, that such a world could not possibly exist. That it was just a scary, yet interesting, what-if scenario. We thought there couldn't possibly be a divine creature that harbored such malice, apathy, and warped sadism. We thought wrong. When the GA Gracefulness arrived at what we now call the Hellas system, they imagined that they'd probably find a couple gas giants, and a habitable world made by a good-aligned but otherwise lazy god. Unfortunately for them, nothing could have been further from the truth. We're not entirely sure what they witnessed, but not even 12 hours after arriving, they'd already activated every single emergency system several times, and sped out of there as quickly as their hyperdrive would allow. Upon being rescued, the crew was given a full medical checkup and psychological evaluation. Most of them were panicked at best and near catatonic at worst. Whatever was out there, it had fractured their minds, and would undoubtedly pose a threat to the entire galactic community if not taken care of quickly. And thus, without further ado, an exploration fleet was tasked with investigating said strange cosmic anomaly. I think we all deep down knew what was about to be revealed to the wider galaxy. We all just sort of prayed we were wrong. About 8 months later, the exploration fleet returned and our worst fears were confirmed. There it was, floating on the screen, a blue ball of death and chaos. GA-14, a world of death, inhabited by horrifying monster and twisted abominations. It looked like a malicious tumor on the canvas that is the universe. If the Alliance's bravest and brightest were to be believed, then this planet was apparently infested with every possible nightmare ever conjured up by sentient minds, anything from gigantic flesh-eating lizards to tiny microscopic viruses. Even some this world's flora had a penchant for death and destruction. There was no denying it, we'd finally found it, the world created by the goddess of the never-ending struggle and eternal misery. While all other divine beings aligned themselves with good and the light she cast of these weaknesses, she saw them and created a world of strife and destruction. Unfortunately, as we'd suspected, we couldn't keep things under wraps for long. When the news finally made its way to the public, most sane people were of course mortified and shocked, but as is often the case, the youth found themselves taking a less conventional stand. Many claimed to be bored with the current state of things and intrigued by this strange world of horrors, and the creatures who live upon it. A sentiment proven and reinforced by the copious amounts of fringe literature and homemade movies said heathenish curiosity spawned. For a time we tried to pretend it didn't exist in the hopes that it would just disappear from the public conscious. But alas, the longer we kept ignoring it, the longer its very existence kept gnawing at us. It's as if it was mocking us, taunting us into destroying it, and so eventually we obliged. At first, we tried to simply freeze the hell world by blotting out the sun. We assumed that a prolonged ice age combined with lowering sea levels would wipe out most, if not all, creatures. But somehow life persisted. Hell, in the time it took us to return for our second attempt, this world had already been completely repopulated, with fresh new horrors which look even more awful and terror-inducing than the first. So seeing as freezing didn't work, we tried the opposite approach. We amplified the sun's rays, and began to scorch GA-14's surface. We dried out large bodies of water, and prematurely activated every volcano we could find. At first, we thought we'd succeeded, that the universe was safe at last. But upon taking a closer look it seemed that a couple tenacious little buggers survived. No, not just survived, they thrived. It was only during our third attempt that we figured out we were making a huge mistake. You see, at this point we had enough. We could practically hear this disgusting world and its wicked goddess taunting us. It was as if we were being toyed with. And so, with very few options left, we decided to make use of certain forbidden sciences we'd once sworn to never unleash upon the universe. I won't bore you with the finer details, but in short, we used technologies that should never have been wielded by mere mortals. We tampered with their atmosphere, quite literally took the breath from their lungs, poisoned every body of water we could find, and for good measure used kinetic gravity-based nukes to try and destabilize their world's core and its tectonic plates, or at least more so than was already the case. We tirelessly observed while methodically tearing this planet apart one atom at a time, and just like before, everything quickly began to perish. 65%, 85%, come on, 90%, 93%, so close, just a little bit more, 94%, 95%, 96%, yes, 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 95%, no 90%, 85%, no, this can't be, 70%, what's happening, 60%, how is this possible, 30%, mass extinction averted. And then it dawned on us. We'd been blinded by our fears and ambitions. In our zealous desire to save the galaxy from the horrors of this world, we'd merely played a hand in fueling its evolution. Only now did we realize that with every doomed attempt, we'd in fact helped the surviving creatures adapt and evolve rapidly. We'd greatly expedited what otherwise would have taken eons. We were doomed from the start. This world's wretched goddess had lured us into her trap and played us for a fool, hook, line, and sinker. It was at this point that many began to lose hope and desert our oh so noble cause. Some decided to simply break rank and escape the system, while others sought refuge from the despair-inducing reality we ourselves had created by fleeing into the merciful embrace of madness. There were even a few brave fools, bless their souls, who aimed their ships at the planet, turned on their engines, and with one last prayer, flung themselves at this world made of nightmares and hate in one last act of defiance in the face of such immeasurable evil. These three plans, as well as what would eventually be dubbed the sacrifices of the foolish and foolhardy, unfolded over the span of many generations, and after many more a brilliant scientist, my ancestor decided that enough was enough. Grand Vizier Atlanio of the great Annalist theocracy, with the help of the High Priest, managed to convince the High Council to attempt to destroy the world of the Dark Goddess one last time. It was a genius plan, no doubt conceived through a sizable helping of divine inspiration. He theorized that there was only one way to truly destroy an entire world, by hitting it with another world. Of course, as we all know, using a piece of the great divine creation as a weapon is considered blasphemy of the highest order, which is why he opted for something similar. Something world-adjacent, so to speak. And so for our last attempt at stamping out this wretched scourge, this disease upon the galaxy, our ancestors flung the largest asteroid they could find, imbued with divine energy at the domain of the Dark Goddess. And just like that it was done. We'd been victorious at last. Surely we needn't have checked whether anything had survived. That would have been preposterous after all, instead of facts that can be proven wrong, or inventions that break we had. And we'll always have something much more potent. Faith. Faith in ourselves, faith in our gods, and faith that tells us that good will always prevail over evil. And as we held faith and observed the surface of this now death and desolate rock from the comfort of our home systems, we could finally determine once and for all that the universe had been saved at last. Or at least that's what we thought, until one of the surveillance drones that the GA Gracefulness had left behind suddenly began to transmit data back to its home system. Apparently something, or rather someone, had initiated its first contact protocol. This had to be some sort of twisted joke. This simply couldn't be true. As much as we didn't want to believe it, the truth simply couldn't be denied. About 37 hours ago, surveillance drone GEG G143951005 detected the presence of a rudimentary spacecraft leaving planet GA14, thematically named after the Dark Goddess that supposedly molded and crafted said world. While our first attempts at wiping out these monsters had resulted in them adapting to said cataclysms, it seems that our latest failure resulted in them adapting not to our technology, but our minds instead. This accursed world had finally seen fit to birth creatures that could rival our intelligence and ingenuity with cunning and deceit. And now, they finally managed to escape their goddess' suffocating embrace. Like the disease they are, they could finally spread themselves among the stars, and soon they would reach us. May the gods help us all. The discovery that Gaia's children had been blessed with the gift of sapience had sent shockwaves rippling throughout the entire Gamma Quadrant. While many of the Alliance's territories could live shrouded in ignorant bliss for a little while longer, as communications between quadrants could take multiple days, Those unfortunate enough to share their little section of the universe with these hellworlders were forced to face the possibility that sooner or later they would have to initiate first contact with their own worst nightmares. These cosmic devils had barely left their home system, and the entire quadrant was already collectively holding its breath and preparing for the unthinkable. The royal family of the Atnian monarchy has already revised their constitution multiple times since the discovery, in an attempt at trying to avoid sending any potential heirs to the battlefield. The Quizuan's Free Democratic Republic, who I'd like to personally applaud for their pragmatism and quick thinking, are currently busy converting every single peacekeeping vessel into something that could potentially fend off the oncoming apocalypse. Then there's the Inoue. As usual, no one really knows what they're up to, but my spies tell me their megaforges have been active around the clock, and the amount of pollution on their industry worlds has multiplied tenfold. And last but not least, there's us, the endless theocracy. In the past, we've always been seen as a mighty religious bulwark for so many lesser civilizations to cling to and hide behind. And as such, I see it as our duty, nay our destiny, that we may help foster peace and cooperation between all species, no matter who they are, so that together we might vanquish these hellish abominations once and for all. It is to this extent that I, Grand Vizier Adlian, have decided to spearhead an initiative whereby I, the Grand Priest, and the other heads of state will gather on the GEA, one of our largest space stations, and discuss what is to be done about the newest threat knocking on the Alliance's door. With a bit of luck, we'll be able to pool our knowledge and experience together, as well as hopefully coordinate our actions in an attempt at driving these cosmic horrors back to where they came from. First and foremost, I would like to thank you all for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, I won't try to deny the severity of the situation, for as you already know, the galaxy is at the precipice of destruction. We may very well be facing the apocalypse as described in many of our sacred texts, a genuine biblical end of days, if you will. But do not despair, for as long as we, those appointed by the gods, draw breath, there is still hope. We still have divine providence on our side, and together we can fight off these monsters. Grand Vizier Atlian bellowed into his microphone, as his fellow heads of state began to focus on the large orb embedded in the center of the council room, which came to life with a soft electronic hum. It opened up, and as if conjuring from thin air, it began to draw an unsettling image of some sort of bull-like abomination adorned in flames and smoke. This creature was covered in darkened scales, which seemed to crack and give way to fiery veins of smoldering magma, and its eyes burned bright with accursed hellfire. It was as if this creature had been spawned from fire and brimstone itself. Upon seeing this, all the council members, who at this point had been quietly murmuring and playing with their communicators, fell silent and started to pay attention. Senator Miss Sella even let out a muffled shriek before trying to make herself as small as possible. Behold a Gaian. Possibly. The Grand Vizier yelled theatrically, knowing that he was going to have to use every trick in the book to get these reprobates to acknowledge his and his species' efforts. After all, while his kind held a lot of political and religious power, compared to the other species, they were fairly useless when it comes to combat. As you might suspect, it's pretty hard to win a fight when your entire body freezes in place at the first sign of danger, a somewhat peculiar gift they had been blessed with thanks to their deity being the god of tranquility and patience. You see, it's been about 68 hours since the Ark of Horrors was spotted, and so in preparation, I've tasked some of the theocracy's finest scientists, psychics, and analysts with studying whatever footage and research we still have left on our soon-to-be enemies. And so, as you might have already suspected, what you see here is what? Begone, demon! Do not torture me any longer with your hideous appearance. King Harunus commanded, while plucking a handful of shiny religious artifacts from his person and dramatically jingling them at the hologram. As I was saying, the Grand Vizier remarked, clearly annoyed by the pedantic child monarch's actions, in the interest of preparing ourselves and our peoples for this oncoming storm, I would like to share with you every other potential form these creatures might have evolved into, as well as some of said forms' accompanying characteristics. For example, while we're not entirely sure yet what their dietary needs are, aside from souls, based on the size of this creature's claws as well as its sharp teeth, we can make an educated guess and say that it would most likely also devour flesh and bones. Although, admittedly, that particular type of behavior seems to be shared between most, if not all, potential forms. Which brings us to our next herald of the apocalypse. The Grand Vizier pressed a button on his communicator, and with an obnoxious click, the hornfire monster dissipated, only to be replaced by what looked to be some sort of aquatic bipedal creature covered in countless tentacles. Whereas the former seemed to be some sort of unholy amalgamation between a scaly, furless bull and a grease fire, this new one was more akin to a giant squid person that had risen out of the deepest depths of the Mariana Trench. Once again, most of the council members cowered. This was, of course, discounting Adlian, who'd already mentally prepared himself in advance, and the Inawayan representative, who was too busy familiarizing his already partially digested lunch with the council floor. You see, it's with this particular evolutionary offshoot that we began to theorize that perhaps, unlike most members of the Alliance, Gaians may be able to thrive in all sorts of environments and not just a specific one. Now, as for our nay, Lord Adlian, Senator Naleto started, I do not think it is necessary to subject this council nor the wider universe to this ghastly seminar. Surely most of the fighting would be done in outer space, or at the very least over large distances. As always, you strike up an excellent point, Senator, one that I and my associates will take into consideration and use to help shape these most holy proceedings in the future. Click. And with another tap of a button, the aquatic monster was replaced with yet another potential hellworlder. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, the leaders present at the council were subjected to every possible sapient creature GA-14 could have spawned. Everything from winged super lizards that could breathe fire to a mass of eyeballs embedded onto a collection of floating, intersecting rings. As time went on, all of them began to one by one take note of a certain peculiar phenomenon. It was like an itch in the back of their minds. The longer they looked at these holograms, the more uncomfortable they felt. It wasn't just fear. It was as if they were regarding something they shouldn't be allowed to look at, or perhaps something they couldn't entirely comprehend. This feeling only got worse as they reached their final potential foe. Unlike before, when a new apparition would solicit a scream or made them cower in fear, this last projection had a slightly different effect. The already fairly quiet room went completely silent as all the council members suddenly felt an unnerving tingle creep up and wash over them. Everyone collectively held their breaths as the room's temperature suddenly seemed to drop, and everyone became very aware of their own mortality. They felt uncomfortable, perhaps even watched, as if this projection had somehow summoned the creature which shape it resembled. It was as if a long and dark gloomy shadow was suddenly cast over the entire room, and all these men and women who'd once proudly pronounced themselves protected by the gods felt like a prey being stalked by a predator, as if their gods had betrayed them, and fled, leaving them to fend for themselves. Like all the other horrors before, this one looked creepy, unnatural, and positively horrifying, but there was more to it than that. This thing, it had some kind of alluring mystique. There wasn't just fear there, it was also, well, a little exciting, like a kid feeling giddy about doing something they weren't supposed to. This made it so that while every fiber of their being told them to look away, that this thing was pure evil, and would corrupt them, somehow they couldn't. They had stared into the abyss, and now it was staring back at them. Like many before, this was yet another biped. It had two front-facing eyes, a patch of hair on top of its head, and 4 primary limbs with which it could grasp, fight, and/or flight. It was presumably only slightly larger than the galactic average, and didn't sport any natural weapons that were immediately obvious, aside from perhaps their sturdy endoskeleton and noticeable muscle mass. Of course, this no doubt would bolster the belief that Gaians most likely used their cunning in tandem with latent psychic powers to survive, and perhaps even claim dominion of a small piece of their homeworld. Minutes passed by as the council members felt their sanity slowly slip away while trying to wrestle themselves free from this abomination's alluring visage. In the end, it was Edel, the Inowayan representative, who managed to reach for his blaster, and with one precise shot ended the presentation. "Everyone all right? Everyone still has their soul?" Hyarunas, the young monarch asked before softly mumbling a prayer. I think that's about enough for today. Let's just wrap things up and continue tomorrow," the Grand Vizier said before turning to the staff present in the council room and impressing upon them his desire to keep everything they'd seen just now a secret. His men had informed him that some of these renders, and especially the last one, might have adverse effects on people's psyche, but he'd never expected anything like this. "Great. Yet another problem to tackle in the near future, as if I didn't have my hands full already," he thought to himself, and just like that everyone left. No one complained or retorted. After all, it seemed that trying to peer past the veil, and that these Gaians had taken a toll on the esteemed leaders of the quadrant. They were all pretty shaken up and battered emotionally. More than anything, they just wanted to retreat back to their rooms, and for at least a little while pretend that none of this had ever happened. Later that evening, Grand Vizier Adlian would find himself sitting behind his study desk reassessing the day's proceedings. It had all gone so smoothly right up until Uncle Addy. Adlian looked up to see his niece had not a barge into his office. Look, I'm a Gaian, Blair." The young analyst ran up to her uncle and proudly twirled around, showing off her costume. Unfortunately for Adlian, the young girl was part of the small yet vocal minority that had seen the discovery of these Gaians as an exciting development instead of the incomprehensible nightmare that it really was. Which is why Adnana had sought fit to, once again, glue a couple of homemade tentacles to her fluffy wool, donned a pair of fake horns and fangs before seeking out her favorite uncle. "That looks great, sweetie, but I'm afraid I'm a little busy at the end," she interrupted him. "And what?" he asked. "And well, do I look like them? Like a Gaian?" Oh well, you see, we're not exactly sure yet. Look, we're trying our best." "Okay, just let Uncle Addy sort this stuff out, and when I'm done I'll come and visit you and show you some of the stuff the lab coats have been working on. All right? I promise this won't take long." "All right, promise, but you better not forget like last time," she said before leaving just as hastily as she'd arrived. As soon as she left, Adlian let out a deep sigh, his facial features hardened into a pensive stare tinted with sadness, aimed at an old family picture on the far left corner of his desk. "I'm not sure what frightens me more, brother. The fact that she too has found herself mesmerized by that cursed planet, or that with each passing day she reminds me more and more of you. Good day, everyone. May the gods be with you," Adlian exclaimed jovially as the council members entered the circular room, took their seats, and responded in kind. It seemed that all of them had returned aside from the young monarch who had sought fit to send a doppelganger in his stead. Such hubris, thinking sly old Adlian wouldn't notice. Then again, maybe it would have worked if said doppelganger hadn't been at least 10 years the Child King's senior. Perhaps he should confront him about his absence later. Regardless, there's no use in pondering such trivial matters right now, for it seems that the Anoan representative has something he'd like to share with the council. At which point, the teddy bear-like Adlian turned on his podium's microphone and began to address the room. Just as the analysts have managed to make some potentially accurate predictions regarding the nature of these Giants, we too have taken the initiative to try and uncover their secrets. Although having said that, I must admit that we haven't been nearly as successful yet. You see, the discovery of these Hellworlders has given us the rare opportunity to field test a new type of ship, one we've equipped with several exciting new modules, some of which allow us to study their planet and listen in on their radio communications from a relatively safe distance, as opposed to older, cruder, and not to mention more easily detectable methods. In that case, am I correct in assuming that you've already learned something interesting you'd like to share with the class? Adlian curiously asked, to which the Anoan hesitantly nodded in response. You see, we've been running their communication through various translation algorithms, but something doesn't seem quite right. So far we haven't been able to make much progress at all. It's like their language keeps changing with every message we intercept. Even our most esteemed linguists just can't seem to make heads or tails of it. According to them, their language is a total mess and horribly inconstant. 1 second it sounds like a tranquil river that smoothly courses past their lips, and another it's more akin to a roaring fire being spat out. My God, the Haruna's look-alike chimes in, don't you see? They've somehow figured out that you've been spying on them, and are now modifying their language accordingly. They're even more cunning than we thought. At which point the entire council room bursts into a panic. Oh gods, they probably already know where we are. One of the mushroom-like senators yells out before bursting into tears, which is followed by the Anoan representative, who once again refuses to keep down his breakfast. In the meantime, the supposed king's entourage protectively surround their fake monarch while Adlian freezes in place. Being the cunning politician that he is, Altion made sure to try and keep his expression neutral. Even if the rest of his body succumbed to his species' fear response, he could still trick the others into thinking he remained calm and collected while they were busy despairing and wallowing in self-pity. Esteemed members of the council, please calm down, Adlian exclaimed as soon as he started to gain control of his body again. This is exactly what they want us to think. That is, if they're all that interested in finding us in the first place. Keep in mind the last attack on their planet was executed millions of years ago. We're not even sure whether they're specifically looking for revenge or set on mindlessly spreading their corruption. Therefore I propose that as long as they don't venture out of their system, we bide our time, gather resources, and stay the hell away until we've got the entire galaxy united and armed to the teeth. Yeah, about that, the Aniwian interjected. You know how we just mentioned that we were spying on their homeworld from a relatively safe distance, he said, while emphasizing the word relatively. Define stay the hell away from. The Grand Vizier rested his face in his hands while letting out a loud, drawn-out sigh. All right, how close? About 2 light-years more or less, the Aniwian responded. From their system? Their planet? Aw shit, Adlian muttered softly under his breath. While under normal circumstances 2 light-years would have been more than acceptable, considering the nature of the looming threat, he wasn't sure whether it was worth the risk. Sure, they'd be able to learn a lot, but if caught, these Gaians would probably use torture, assimilation, or manage to somehow physically extract whatever information they needed out of the crew, at which point they'd know exactly where to come and look for the rest of the civilized universe. No, we can't gamble away our people's lives like this. We aren't like those monsters, we're civilized. Once the council meeting has concluded, I'll be sure to privately confront the Aniwian on the matter and discourage the continuation of said mission. Gods, I'm such an idiot. Reka let out a sigh before slumping forwards onto her desk. There she was, on a Spectre-class recon vessel. The newest, most advanced recon ship the Aniwian Confederacy has ever produced. Or so they claimed. She couldn't believe she'd actually taken the job. They lured her in with false promises of excitement, honor, and recognition, but in reality all it had been was equal parts dull boredom and nervous fright. On one hand, she was stuck in a cloaked ship in the middle of cousin fuck nowhere, while on the other, as the ship's resident xenologist, she was tasked with studying all she could about these Gaians, which combined with her proximity to their homeworld, made her deeply afraid. What's more, it appears that the threat these creatures pose may have been somewhat understated. After all, it seems they're already in the middle of spreading their infernal corruption. As everyone knows, only the gods can create and shape worlds. For anyone else to try and simulate their divine craftsmanship was heresy of the highest order. Back home, the insinuation alone would be fought with ridicule and condescension. And yet there they were, building domed settlements on that red barren Hell's Cape. Based on some of our censors' readings, it appears that they were slowly assimilating it, and turning it into yet another world for their dark goddess. Gods, will this be the fate of the entire galaxy if we don't stop them? Will all our cradle worlds get corrupted and turned into more Gaian hive worlds? The thought alone made her shudder and wince. No, I can't let them get into my head like that. The entire universe may be at stake. I should focus and finish my report as soon as possible. The rate at which they're expanding and advancing technologically may be way beyond our initial predictions. I have to send my findings to the council as soon as possible. She suddenly got interrupted by what had to be the vile machinations of the dark goddess. Out of nowhere, and without warning, the lights turned off, followed by various shrieks and cries for help reverberating from deeper within the ship. "Oh gods, what is it now?" she asked, with annoyed frustration tinging her voice. The Anoan made her way to the hall, where she was confronted by a small contingent of engineers, one of which was now shining a flashlight right into her face. "Ma'am, please stay in your room. There's been a problem with the ship's power supply. Don't worry, it's nothing major, but due to the curious nature of the issue, it might take a couple minutes for the backup reactor to turn on," the lead engineer informed her before he and his team took off again. Reika wanted to trust the engineer's words. This was most likely just a small issue stemming from the fact that the Confederacy had hurriedly slapped together various experimental systems onto a recon vessel, with very little regard for power management protocols. Taking into account the threat these Gaians could pose, such a theory seemed fairly reasonable. But what if that wasn't the case? What if, just like with the extermination fleets, Gaia had lured us here, and now that we're in her sphere of influence, she'd no longer let us go? No, I can't think like that, she chastised herself. Falling into despair like that won't solve anything. I'm sure that an automatic distress call has already, oh no. A certain realization hit her like a bus. Whenever an Alliance vessel has a major systems malfunction, like for example a power outage, an automatic distress call will be sent out. A distress call that's easy to detect and powerful enough to reach civilized space. Of course, what the designers of said safety protocol hadn't taken into account was the potential proximity of a reality-ending scourge of hyperadaptive, voracious horrors who might actually be able to pick up on said signal. Gods, what should I do? What can I do? What if they actually manage to reach us? Would they simply eat us, suck out our souls? What if they can assimilate us somehow, or instead use us to find our home systems? Intelligence-wise, they're supposedly on par with the rest of the universe after all. Before the young Inawayan could give herself a headache from overthinking so much, the lights suddenly turned back on, followed by a chime and the captain's calming voice. "Good day, everyone. May the gods be with you. I first and foremost, on behalf of the Alliance and the Great Inawayan Confederacy, would like to apologize for the slight inconvenience. Rest assured, everything is fine and there's no need to panic, but unfortunately we will be stranded here for a little while longer. So with that being said, would everyone please gather in the cafeteria for a head count and for us to clarify certain unfortunate circumstances we find ourselves in. Thank you. Most of the crew had already made themselves comfortable by the time Reika arrived at the cafeteria. Luckily, she wouldn't have to wait for long, seeing as the GA's subtlety was a relatively small vessel with only a crew of about 70 people. A few minutes later, once everyone had been accounted for, the captain got on top of one of the tables and began to address the crew directly. Unfortunately, to everyone's dismay, Reika's theory had been correct. While one of the engineers had been quick to manually force an unexpected shutdown using only a wrench and some elbow grease, it was apparently already too late. The ship had sent out an automatic distress signal that, if picked up, the Gaians could use to track down their ship. As the captain had no doubt expected, the crew began to panic. Some pointed fingers and accused others of being saboteurs and traitors while trying to leave the now locked room prematurely, while others focused their fears inward and began to give in to whatever their body's favored response was to having just been told that they might get hunted down and ripped apart by a race of Lovecraftian horrors. "Everyone, please don't lose hope," the captain bellowed. "The chance that we should meet such a fate is fairly small. There's still a decent chance that they won't understand or will simply dismiss the signal, or perhaps we'll get rescued before those things find us. Keep in mind, while scary, they're still fairly primitive, so even if they reach us, there are still a few things we can do to defend ourselves. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna have the chief of security unlock the doors. We're all gonna retreat to our quarters in an orderly fashion. And in about 4 hours, once everyone's had the chance to calm down and regain their senses, we're gonna reconvene at the armory, and we're gonna prepare for whatever may happen. Don't worry, I know things may seem hopeless, but I'm sure that together we can get through this. Now then, who's with me? Come on, hurry, hurry! I don't want to be late!" Cindy yelled while dragging her friend along through the space station's crowded plaza. "Can't you at least slow down a little? If I'd known we'd be running, I would have worn different shoes," Adnana retorted while trying to keep up with her manic Adnian friend. Eventually, the two of them found themselves in front of a doorway that had been crudely decorated with a pair of black bedsheets. Some printed out pictures of cosmic monsters, as well as a large homemade banner that read, "Gaia's Secret Children." I'm pretty sure you guys aren't allowed to just claim one of the station's rooms like that," Adnana informed her friend. "Oh, come now. Half the station isn't in use right now. A station created at the behest of your uncle, if memory serves me right. Plus, if they knew what we're doing here, they'd admonish us either way, so just relax for a change. Everything will be fine, you'll see." Cindy tried to put her friend's mind at ease before lifting one of the bedsheets and dragging her inside. Once inside, Adnana was greeted by the sight of 2 Quizuans and another Analyst. The female Quizuan was writing something down on her communicator, while the 2 guys were busy drawing a creature with a frightening amount of tentacles and teeth. Adnana was about to introduce herself when the female Quizuan looked up and jovially addressed her. "Oh shit, you're finally here. We were starting to think that Seni had either made you up or was selfishly keeping you all to herself." At which point, the 2 boys laid down their pencils and rushed over to go and greet their aspiring cult's newest member. After they'd all gotten a chance to introduce themselves, Seni took it upon herself to kick off this week's club meeting. She got up on one of the tables and began to address her fellow harbingers of doom. "Mwahaha, good day everyone, and may the dark goddess watch over us," she said after donning a black cape with a comically large collar and laughing evilly. At which point, the other members followed Seni's lead and began to dress up in manner that befits the supposed followers of Gaia. Adnana was glad she always brought her cardboard horns and fangs wherever she went. Otherwise she'd sure look quite foolish right about now. Now then, Seni started while grinning wickedly, seeing as we've got a new member joining us today, a new initiate who's ready to stand against those who defy us, another lost child who's ready to accept her place beneath the mistress of madness, the lady of lies, the dame of Destru. Yeah, get on with it already, would ya? Colette, the female Quizoine, interrupted her. As I was saying, my best friend Nana is joining us today. At which point, she made a little heart with her fingers at her. And to commemorate this joyous occasion, we will be feasting on the flesh of the innocent. Cindy went and grabbed a platter she'd hidden in one of the room's empty closets before dropping it on the table she just stood on. In case you were wondering, yes, they contain the souls of our enemies, the Atnian proudly proclaimed with a mischievous giggle. Apparently, the would-be priestess and pastry chef had prepared what looked like moist, fleshy bread pudding, like buns covered in some sort of thick red sauce that obviously was meant to look like blood. The group looked kind of nervous, seeing as to their innocent, herbivorous eyes, the clumsily made pastries looked somewhat like real meat. Wait a minute, didn't you make these with that fake meat recipe on the Gayan forum? I remember a couple posts on the hot page that showed off suspiciously similar treats. How about, shush and cannibalize your lessers, my fellow spawn of destruction and chaos, Cindy retorted while stuffing one of her desserts into the snitch's mouth. The 5 members of Gaya's cutest cult began to eat the strange yet delicious treats, while casually talking among themselves. Each of them had at least 1 or 2 stories to tell about their supposed encounters with the cosmic horrors, after which they bonded over the way their parents would admonish them for being somewhat slightly obsessed with horror and the unknown. Although to be fair, who wouldn't get bored with the stale, stagnant monotony of the universe? Everything's safe, regulated and micromanaged to the point where nothing exciting ever happens, or at least that's how things used to be. If there's anything they all agree on, it's that those Gaians would shake things up and finally change things for the better, which to them sounded like a dream come true. After all, being on the GA authoritative meant that the parents of these youngsters were at the very least pretty high up in the social hierarchy, which to each of them meant that, even more so than regular people, their lives were constantly being controlled, micromanaged, and made mind-numbingly boring without them being able to do anything about it. Something quickly proven by the sight of one of Cindy's maids popping her head through the entrance's bedsheets. Upon seeing the 5 tiny would-be cultists eating what to her must have looked like flesh and blood, the stuffy-looking maid's expression instantly turned into one of confused shock. Her leathery skin turned increasingly pale as she threw up her hands as if to say, "I'm not even going to bother with this shit," and she quickly power-walked the fuck out of there. The maid's expeditious retreat was accompanied by the sound of muffled giggles and laughter, as most of them were still in the middle of eating Cindy's delicious pastries. Back on the GA's subtlety, the captain and his crew were busy barricading the bridge while waiting for the inevitable, or at least the 20 or so who'd bothered to show up. Everyone else was undoubtedly either in their rooms, quietly sobbing and trying to accept their fate, or hiding somewhere in the hopes that the Gaians wouldn't find them. The captain had to admit, though, after one of the navigators had detected one of the Gaians' metallic abominations cruising towards us about an hour ago, he'd almost joined those cowardly fools in their prayers while hiding himself in the ship's cargo hold. Luckily for his mortal soul, his sense of duty managed to overtake his cold, calculating desire for survival. Even if his resolve had almost slipped, at least he wasn't one of the few sniveling traitors who'd instead decided to try and appease those abominations by praying to them and their petty excuse for a deity. Not long after, the captain was pulled from his thoughts by the chief security officer announcing the arrival of the Gaians. They jumped to their general location not too long ago, and had now finally reached their vessel. Unfortunately for them, their backup generator would only power the most essential modules, which to these self-titled pacifists now meant that they had nothing to fire at the Gaians with. There was no doubt anymore. Those things were hell-bent on destroying us. For the last 10 minutes leading up to their arrival, they'd sought fit to bombard our communication systems with all manner of strange signals and undecipherable madness. They were undoubtedly trying to somehow mess with our systems, or at the very least, our nerves. With only seconds to spare, the chief engineer finally managed to remotely overload one of the breakers responsible for keeping the lights on, which should give us at least a little bit more time. Not long after, we felt it. The entire ship shook. They'd somehow brute-forced themselves through one of the airlocks, and were probably in the midst of boarding us as we speak. May the gods save us all. Fuck this, fuck that, fuck everything, and most importantly, fuck my life. Reika angrily hissed to herself, while clumsily running around the ship's darkened hallways. Her indecisiveness had caused her to waste too much time looking for a suitable hiding spot, and now, with no time left and the lights out, once again, she was forced to wander around looking for literally any place to hide. Eventually, she ended up wandering into the med bay just in time, as at the end of the hallway, she could hear someone violently tearing open the doors to the medical ward. Hello? Anyone there? We picked up your distress signal. Is everything okay? Reika nearly let out a scream as the cosmic entity's growls and grunts confirmed her worst fears, as well as re-emphasized how close she was to dying a horrific death, or worse. No doubt it was taunting and ridiculing her with what soon would be her fate, in the hopes she'd somehow understand its incomprehensible language. She quickly hid in one of the closets, but left it slightly ajar. If she was about to die anyways, she at least wanted to know what this supposed harbinger of doom looked like. Of course, fate had sought fit to screw her over yet again, as the Gaian had apparently donned some sort of combat armor that covered its entire body. It was completely white sleek, and based on the sound of its footsteps, she guessed it was fairly heavy, even though the Gaian was walking around as if it weighed nothing. Please don't find me. Please don't find me. She softly prayed to herself, while trying not to burst out in tears. It was slowly getting closer. Any second now, it would open the closet doors and do unspeakable things to her. Fuck it! She couldn't take it anymore. She yelled before bursting out of her hiding spot like a space bat out of space hell. She tried to push past the armored Gaian, but almost immediately lost her footing and fell to the floor before trying to scramble away as quickly as possible, knocking over a couple trays holding surgical equipment in the process. The Gaian, on the other hand, let out a loud scream of his own and took a step back before tripping over a box full of medical supplies. As soon as the two frightened chucklefucks managed to somewhat come to their senses, they noticed that in their panic state, they'd knocked over a lot of dangerous and sharp medical equipment. Like, for example, laser scalpels, dental drills, and other pointy surgical thingamabobs. Reika was the first to react and, with nothing left to lose, went on the offensive. She began by heroically and mercilessly pelting the Gaian with various pill bottles and crumpled up doctor's note, to which the Gaian reacted by whipping her with an unwound bandage before grabbing a pillow from one of the nearby beds and throwing it at her face. It took an embarrassing 5 minutes for the both of them to realize that neither alien had any intention to harm the other, at which point the entire room was practically covered in enough scattered pills to make a junkie forever disavow the 5-second rule. After their valiant battle and an awkward silence, the Inawayan was the first to act. She wasn't sure why she did what she did, other than the fact that there was little else she could think of to do. But nevertheless, she stuck out her hand, as if politely greeting an old friend, and to her astonishment the Gaian seemed to know exactly what that meant, as it just as quickly reached out and interlocked her hand with his own. With amicable relations established, both creatures cautiously got up while making sure not to take their eyes off of each other, at which point Reika slowly took a few steps towards the door before sprinting away from there as quickly as possible. While this Gaian had seemed to be completely unlike what the holy text had described, there was no way of knowing what its intentions were. For all she knew, it was just luring her into a false sense of security, or an anomaly among its own kind. Either way, there was no way she was risking sticking around to find out. Once again, Reika made her way through the darkened halls of the ship in search for a better place to hide. Perhaps if she made it back to her room, she could simply barricade it and wait things out. She thought to herself before her train of thought suddenly got interrupted by the sight of two nervous-looking crew members beckoning her closer. They were standing in the doorway of one of the operating rooms while fidgeting frantically. One of them was clearly dressed as a security officer, while she recalled that the other worked at the hydroponics bay. Pissed. We just found the perfect hiding spot. If you hurry, we'll let you join us. The security officer whispered at her while his friend was using a flashlight to keep an eye on both sides of the hallway. Seeing no reason not to trust them, Reika hurriedly ran over to the two of them. As soon as Reika stepped inside, she felt one of them try to tackle her to the ground. Being a researcher, she'd never really cared much for physical fitness, and quickly found herself overpowered with her arms restrained behind her back. At which point, her assailant's accomplice began to tie her up. "Wait, let me go." "What are you doing?" she asked with tears staining the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry, but this is our only chance.